What's up guys? Today we're going to be installing the SuperATV RackBoss 2.0 on this Polaris RZR XP 1000. Let's get right to it. The first thing we're going to do is remove our front wheels and tires. So our machine's equipped with a SuperATV Black Ops winch. If your machine's equipped with a winch, you don't necessarily have to remove it, but we're gonna remove ours for video purposes. So now we're gonna go ahead and remove our tie rods from our knuckle. Just repeat that same exact step to the opposite side. Very good. Now we're going to remove our hardware connecting our steering shaft to the pinion shaft on a rack and pinion. On our machine, we have a 15mm bolt head and a 17mm nut. Once you've removed your nut, go ahead and remove the bolt. So our bolt's stuck. What we're going to do is take a punch and a hammer and just tap the bolt out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try to split where the steering shaft comes together here. What I like to do is take a flat screwdriver and a hammer and just kind of tap it in there a little bit to spread it. That's going to help it come off of the splines on the rack and pinion. As you can see now, it's moving up and down, but it's not going to completely come off yet until we start to remove our rack and pinion. So now we're going to remove all the nuts securing the rack and pinion to the frame of the machine. So now that we have all of our nuts removed from our studs on our rack and pinion, we can take a pry bar, pry the rack and pinion away from the frame. So we got the rack out. Like I told y'all, it's a little bit of a struggle to get it out. We had a pry bar, kind of working it back and forth, making sure that our studs weren't getting into our pinion seal or anything like that, but you work it back and forth enough, it will come out. So now that we've got our rack removed from the machine, we went ahead and unboxed the RackBoss 2.0 heavy duty rack and pinion. Right off the bat, what you're gonna notice with this rack and pinion is that it's already centered. So when you get this from SuperATV, you're gonna see that you have a paint mark indicating that the shaft is centered to the rack. That means everything's good to go. Another thing that you're going to notice is that it's greasable. This is a grease zerk here. It's already pre-greased whenever you receive it, but later on down the road, all you have to do is put your grease gun there, pump it full of grease, and you're good to go. And also you're gonna notice that you have a hardware kit. These 3 long bolts are gonna go through the actual rack body itself, something like that, and then the shorter bolts will go through over here. So now that we've confirmed it's centered, our boots are on, everything's ready to go, we're gonna take this rack, get it in the machine, and get some hardware started. So before we install our rack and pinion, you just wanna make sure that your steering wheel is straight, and you wanna make sure it's straight whenever you attach your steering shaft to the pinion on the rack and pinion. Due to the RackBoss 2.0 being larger and stronger, you will have to remove the bolts on your front differential, slide your front differential forward and potentially disconnect the prop shaft and slide it out of the way in order to install the new rack and pinion. So now that we've removed our hardware for our front differential and scooted it as far forward as we could, as well as removed the prop shaft, we're ready to get the rack and pinion installed to the machine. So now that we have our rack and pinion slid into place, we just want to make sure that we have our steering wheel straight once again. So we're going to double check that real quick. Our steering wheel is straight. So now we're going to attach the steering shaft to the pinion on the rack and pinion. So once you have your rack and pinion in place, you have your steering shaft on and your steering wheel is straight, your rack is still centered. Once you've confirmed all that, you can go ahead and take one of your bolts that we previously have shown you out of the hardware kit, slide it through the rack and pinion, then through the frame of the machine, and we're just gonna start a nut. We're not gonna fully tighten anything just yet. Once you have one of your bolts started, go ahead and go through and start all of your hardware. Once you have all your hardware started, you can go ahead and fully tighten all your hardware. So now we're going to line our groove on our pinion shaft up with the steering shaft and install our pinch bolt. Now we're going to install our nut. Very good. Then we're going to fully tighten our pinch bolt. So now that all our hardware is tight for our rack and pinion, as well as our steering shaft to the rack and pinion, we're going to grab our SuperATV tie rods, and we decide to go with the billet. If you're installing the steel, it's the same exact installation procedure. Just take the tie rod and thread it onto the threads of the inner ball and socket, or the inner tie rod. So I like to go ahead and thread my tie rod about 3/4 of the way up the threads. And once we've got that, we'll grab our tie rod end. And this will be left-hand thread. So you're gonna thread it in just like this. And again, do about 3/4. You want them adjusted evenly. Something like that. Then you want to confirm that your steering wheel is straight and your rack and pinion is centered, which ours is. So we're going to grab our tapered stud hardware. So we're going to take our tapered stud, we're going to put it in our knuckle where our factory tie rod was installed. And we'll take a nut, start it on the bottom. We'll just get it good and started. Then what we're going to do is adjust our tie rod to where it lines up with our tapered stud, with the wheel being straight, and then try to get your rotor as straight as possible. I like to just kind of eyeball it, just to kind of make sure it's somewhat straight. We are going to have to set the toe, but that'll just make it easier. So then you're going to take your misalignment bushing, drop it on, put your nut on, then you'll put a 19 wrench on the top, and the 19 socket on the bottom. You can use a ratchet, but I found it's much easier to use an impact. Get it good and tight on the bottom, take your impact, come to the top, make sure it's good and tight. Then we're gonna grab a cotter pin for the top, slide it through, fold it around like this. Same thing on the bottom. Now just repeat the same exact steps for the opposite side. So now that you have your rack and pinion tight, your tie rods installed, your tapered studs, everything's tight, what you need to do now is go ahead and reinstall any hardware you've removed or any components that you've removed, and then reinstall the tires. We'll sit it down on the ground and set the toe. So now we've got all our components reinstalled, everything's fully tightened, got the wheels and tires back on the machine, got it sat on the ground. We have Corey here helping us today. We're going to be setting the toe, but before we can set the toe, we need to make sure that the suspension is settled on the machine, so we're going to roll it back and forth about 5 times. Last one. So now that we've rolled it out, I'm going to push down on the suspension a little bit and then make sure that our wheel is straight. So now that our wheel's straight, what we're going to do is we're going to take a measurement from the center line of this tire on the front to the center line on that tire on the front. So it looks like we're right at 1540. Now we're going to do the same thing on the back side of the tire. Whenever you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're not making contact with the skid plate or anything of that nature that could throw your measurement off. So it looks like we're about 20 millimeters off from zero. We're wider in the front than we are in our rear, so that means that we are towed out. Typically, whenever I set the toe on a machine, I like to get it to where it's 5 millimeters towed in or 0. It's totally up to you. The closer to 0 the better, the more true that the machine's going to drive. So now what we're going to do is grab our tie rod, and this is another awesome feature about SuperATV's tie rods is that they are double adjustable. So we make sure that our jam nuts are loose and ran all the way back, and we are going to spin it a couple times here, and we'll do that same exact step on the opposite side. We'll remeasure until we have it set to 0, or like I said, whatever you prefer, 5mm towed end, 10mm towed end, totally up to you. So that's all there is to it to install SuperATV's RackBoss 2.0 Rack and Pinion on this Polaris RZR XP 1000. Be sure to check the description below for a link to pick yours up today, and while you're there, drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.